They laughed when she walked into the flight academy. Grease-stained overalls, no degree, just years under the wings of broken planes. Too slow, too emotional. Not officer material, they wrote. But what happens when the only person left to fly is the one they told never belonged? What do you call a girl who's never flown, yet lands a jet blind through a storm with 28 lives on board, after the trained pilot passes out mid-air? Coincidence? Luck? Or something the manuals never taught? Wait until you hear how the sky answered her silence and why they're begging her to come back. The fluorescent hum in the hallway was unkind. Cold. Clinical. It buzzed like a mosquito in the ears, and Elise, oil beneath her fingernails, creases in her overalls still smelling faintly of avgas, stood out like a smudge on polished glass. Around, her cadets waited in uniforms pressed sharp enough to draw blood. Their shoes clicked confidently on linoleum. Their badges caught the overhead light like metals forged for war. Elise didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. Everyone felt. If she held her application tightly, edges softened from weeks of folding and unfolding. Her hands, the hands that once rebuilt an engine blindfolded for fun, trembled slightly. It wasn't fear, not really. It was the weight of all the voices she had carried to this place. Her father's quiet faith, her own unspoken ache. The name, at the top of the paper, looked foreign here. Elise Laurent. Beneath it, a line that seemed both proud and pitiful in this place. Occupation, aircraft mechanic. The door opened with a sterile click. A clipboard emerged. Her name was called. She stood. Inside, the interview room was all steel and stillness. 3 men. One woman sat behind a long curved desk, eyes already halfway past her as she stepped in. Her boots left a faint mark on the clean tile. Laurent. "Sit down," said the man in the middle. A voice like an intercom. She did. The woman flipped through her file. Pages rustled, the sound sharp in the silence. 13 years, she muttered. No flight school, no simulator training, no aerodynamics coursework. Elise opened her mouth, heart like a hand against her ribs, knocking. I've logged over 7,000 hours inside engines I've rebuilt. The examiner to the left cut in, smirking without looking up. Yes, we know. Wrenches, hydraulics, lubrication schedules. He waved a dismissive hand. It's admirable. In its place. Too emotional, the woman said. She circled something with a red pen. Too slow. Not officer material. The man in the center chuckled. We should hang this one in the maintenance wing. For morale. And just like that, it was over. No deliberation, no consideration. Just a pen, a line, a laugh. Elise stood up slowly. Her boots made no sound this time. The air was thinner now, or maybe it was just her lungs, tight with something heavy and burning. She didn't cry. Not here. Not for them. Outside the room, the hallway stretched long and empty. She walked until the doors closed behind her, the echo swallowed by the walls. Then she sat on a bench, worn wood too low for comfort, and stared at her calloused palms. They dismissed her as slow, as soft, because her voice wasn't loud, because she fixed planes instead of flying them, because she didn't look like a leader should. But what they didn't see, what they refused to see, was this. Every shiver in her fingers had learned the vibration of failing rotors. Every silence in her chest had memorized the way metal cries before it breaks. She knew what it meant to listen, not just with ears, but with soul. She had lived beneath the belly of machines, where no applause echoed, where only precision meant survival. They laughed. She listened, they rejected, she remembered. And somewhere, behind the sting of shame, behind the flush of injustice, Elise felt a flicker. Not rage, not revenge, a promise. They had shut the door. She would learn how to fly, without it. The air in her father's hangar was always warm, never from heaters, but from the breath of machines, and the slow exhale of stories stored in metal. The kind of place where the light came in slanting, amber through dusty glass, catching on, The wings of aging aircraft and casting long shadows that moved when the wind teased the open bay doors. Elise grew up there, not just playing, but listening. Not just watching, but learning. "Engines speak, Elise," her father would say, crouching over a humming fuselage, sleeves rolled past his elbows, arms traced with old burns and the ink of grease. "You just have to listen. Every whine, every pause, every tremor, it means something." She was 5 the first time she sat inside a cockpit, knees barely clearing the seat's edge. She didn't touch the yoke. She didn't even reach for the switches. She just sat there in awe, her breath caught in her throat like a hymn. Outside, the world was fields and clouds. Inside, it was dials, throttles, altimeters, a church of motion. At 8, she knew which torque wrenches sang smoothest. At 12, she was her father's second shadow. By 16, she could diagnose a stuck valve by the stutter it gave at 40% power. But when she mentioned flying, really flying, the grown-ups all did the same thing. A kind laugh, a gentle headshake, a touch to her shoulder as if to steady her delusion. Fixing planes is noble, Elise. Don't ruin it by chasing what isn't yours. Her uncle, once a pilot himself, offered the hardest truth on a warm Sunday afternoon, as she wiped oil from her hands and watched the contrails cross the sky. "You're sharp, kid, but you're not the kind they pick. You'd be a distraction in the cockpit, too quiet, too delicate. That's not what command looks like. Delicate." That word stayed with her longer than the scent of engine grease, like something made of porcelain, fragile and ornamental. As if the softness of her voice, the calm of her movements, the careful way she held a bolt before tightening, it all made her less. But she didn't push back. Not then. That wasn't her way. Elise wasn't the kind to shout in rooms that never listened. She just kept fixing, kept learning. The hangar became her sanctuary. There, machines didn't care if she wore overalls or lipstick. They didn't care if her voice quivered or if her hands hesitated. They only responded to truth, precision, patience. There was one plane she returned to again and again, a 1970s twin-engine trainer with rust blooming at its joints. No one flew it anymore, but Elise would sit inside it during breaks, letting her fingers trace the panel like reading Braille, pretending. She imagined the weight of flight, the sound of air cracking as wings cut through sky, the vibration of freedom in her spine. But imagination was the only sky she had. The outside world had boxed her in with careful compliments and invisible fences. She was the girl they praised for resilience, as long as it stayed on the ground. The girl who knew her tools but not her place when she dared to dream beyond them. And still, quietly, steadily, Elise prepared. She read flight manuals long after the hangar lights went. Ow! She built mock cockpits in her father's shed, stitched together from salvaged dashboards. She taught herself wind patterns from the shapes they carved in clouds. She whispered airspeed conversions to herself like bedtime prayers. No one knew. No one had to. Because Elise wasn't preparing to ask again. She was preparing for the day she wouldn't have to. The day a wrench wouldn't be enough. The day someone would need more than a mechanic, and she would be there, not begging for a seat but ready for it. There's a quiet kind of rebellion in doing the work no one expects of you. Elise carried that rebellion in her bones. Every bolt she tightened, every screw she aligned, it was a note in a song only she knew. And the chorus was coming, not today, not yet, but soon. It began, as such things often do, with a misstep that had nothing to do with her. A routine training mission. A mid-level cadet, Daniels, took a bad fall on the tarmac. Nothing life-threatening, just a twisted knee swollen too fast for the flight. Doctor to ignore. The training jet was fueled, scheduled, and cleared. The instructors paced in tight circles, muttering into radios and checking watches, irritation shadowing their brows. They needed someone in that cockpit, not to fly, just to fill the chair. Protocol demanded 2 in every training jet, even if just sat still and breathed. Someone expendable. Laurent, barked Commander Holt, his voice carrying over the noise of hangar hydraulics. He didn't call her Miss. Didn't even look at her fully, as if the summoning alone were already too generous. Elise stepped forward from where she'd been sorting engine parts, goggles pushed to her forehead, gloves still half on. "Sir, you've done simulator. Hours, right?" He didn't wait for her answer. "Suit up, you're in the back seat for Bravo 9's run. You'll be ballast, that's all." She blinked. It wasn't a question. It was barely an invitation. The academy didn't allow mechanics. In flight seats, it was policy. A line never crossed, until now. There were murmurs as she passed through the prep hall, glances over shoulders, smirks. Are we that short-staffed? Guess we're letting the janitors in next. She better not throw up in the mask. Elise kept walking. The flight suit didn't fit perfectly. The sleeves bunched at the wrists. The boots were half a size too large. But the helmet, when it clicked into place over her ears, it silenced the world like diving into deep water. She could hear only her own breath. Steady, measured. 1, 2, 1, 2. When she climbed into the cockpit, the metal under her fingers felt like memory. Muscle remembered even if no one else did. Across from her, Cadet Harlow, the one cleared to fly, gave her a side-eye and a half-smile. "You ever been in the air, grease girl?" Elise fastened her straps. "Not officially," he snorted. "Just keep quiet and don't touch anything." The canopy sealed shut with a hiss. The jet groaned to life. The tarmac fell away. For the first few minutes, Elise said nothing. She followed protocol, head down, eyes on gauges, hands idle. The world outside blurred, runway to rooftops to sky. But inside, something uncurled, slowly, like a bird stretching its wings after a long, cold wait. The sky was not soft. It pushed, pulled, jostled. But Elise didn't flinch. She felt it all. The pressure changes, the engine's pitch shifting at altitude, the faint quiver in the left intake valve. She knew that sound. Knew it like an old song. Halfway through the flight, turbulence rocked them hard. Harlow cursed, adjusting trim too quickly. The plane dipped. Elise's fingers clenched the seat for a breath, then relaxed. "I think the left engine's running hot," she said quietly. Harlow scoffed. "Everything's fine." "No, it's vibrating off cycle. You'll burn through the EGT margin if you don't rebalance." He glanced at her, startled, then at the gauge, then adjusted. The needle steadied. He didn't thank her. But for the rest of the flight, he didn't laugh either. When they touched down, the instructors clapped Harlow on the shoulder. Elise unbuckled herself silently. No praise, no mention of her call. She stepped down from the cockpit onto warm concrete, heart still somewhere in the clouds. No one congratulated her. No one even looked her way. But she had sat in the sky. She had felt it. She had spoken in the language of air and fire, and it had answered. It was meant to be a seat-filling favor, a formality. But Elise knew better. The sky didn't care if you had a badge. It didn't care if you were invited. It cared if you could listen, react, respect it. And she had done that not with power but with presence, not with rank but with understanding. Back in the hangar, she peeled off the flight suit slowly, reverently. She folded it as if it were silk, placing it gently. On the bench, no one had seen what happened, not really. But she had, and the sky had, and now it was watching. She should have known the first flight wouldn't change anything. The morning after her unexpected ascent, Elise walked into the debriefing room expecting, she wasn't sure what. A nod, a question, maybe just less silence. Instead, she got the same old concrete. The instructors didn't mention her. Not her input, not her composure, not the engine balance she caught mid-air that could have melted a turbine. They talked about Harlow's reflexes. His future. When her name came up, it was as an afterthought. Maintenance crew provided additional presence in the rear. No complications. No complications. That was what she'd been. A body with no agency. An absence of incident. The following week, they began letting her sit in on flight modules. Not because they suddenly believed in her, but because someone in administration had quietly decided if she could shut up and follow orders, she could fill in during cadet shortages. a filler. A. Spare. The flight instructors, mostly ex-military, sharp-edged and sun-hardened, made no effort to hide their disdain. Commander Holt kept calling her grease hands. Captain Vale, the youngest among them, was the worst. He smiled like an open wound. "Laurent," he said during one engine start session, "how about you recite the full takeoff sequence?" "No. Manuals." She did. "Perfectly." He clapped mockingly. "You know, if planes flew on confidence alone, maybe you'd have a shot." Every laugh that followed was sharp, well-timed, and unanimous. The other cadets never said anything outright, but she heard the whispers. Affirmative action, maybe. She probably fixed someone's car on base and got a favor. Bet she's out before phase 2. They were polite to her face. That brand of cruelty. And Elise? She said nothing. She didn't answer back. She didn't defend her place. She didn't argue when she was made to clean up after training runs or sit last in simulation drills. She simply showed up, took notes, watched, memorized. Because while they were performing for each other, Elise was performing for no one. She sat in the cockpit and closed her eyes, not to escape, but to feel. She trained her senses to pick up every tremor, every shift of weight, the subtle strain in the metal skin of the aircraft when wind speed changed just slightly. She cataloged engine tones like a symphony, mapping which screw produced which rattle at which altitude. She learned the personalities of the planes. Bravo 6 had a sluggish climb rate. Echo 7 always jerked left if the humidity crept above. The 90%. Foxtrot 1's flaps whined under pressure, just enough to tell her when to ease back a hair. In the silent hours after drills, when most cadets went to the gym or scrolled through their feeds, Elise stayed behind. She sat in grounded cockpits in the hangar, sometimes long after lights out, helmet on, hands still, just breathing, listening. And slowly, something began to shift. Not in the way people treated her, but in the way she treated herself. She stopped, waiting for praise. She stopped hoping someone would stand up and say, "You're right, you belong." Because it was never going to happen. She understood now, the systems that denied her weren't broken. They were built that way. And their weapon wasn't exclusion. It was ridicule. The laugh, the side eye, the silence. That was how they made you forget your own worth. But Elise remembered. She remembered the hangar's hum, her father's knuckles tapping a wrench like a tuning fork, the smell of jet fuel in her hair. She remembered her own breath in the back seat of that first flight, steady and strong, while the trained pilot had panicked. Most of all, she remembered the feel of the sky, alive, immense, merciless, and listening. And so, she kept showing. She became the quiet presence that haunted simulators, landing sequences better than the top 3 cadets combined. She corrected throttle settings before instructors caught them. She predicted altitude errors by sound alone, and never once did she raise her voice. They wanted her loud so they could dismiss her. Instead, she gave them precision. They wanted a spectacle. Instead, she gave them silence so sharp it echoed. And if anyone had bothered to look closely, really look, they might have seen it, that she wasn't standing behind. She was standing apart, waiting, not for permission, but for the moment the cockpit wasn't a classroom anymore. The moment theory turned to crisis. The moment instinct became command. Because that's when truth surfaces. And Elise was ready. It was meant to be an ordinary day. The weather report said light clouds, minimal gusts. Bravo 9 was scheduled for a multi-phase navigation drill, part of a new assessment track for elite cadets. Elise, by now a fixture on standby, was slotted into the co-seat of an aging twin-engine jet alongside Cadet Thompson, a golden boy with a jawline sharp enough to slice bread and the kind of confidence that only ever comes from being told you belong. Elise said nothing when she saw her name, beside his on the manifest. She didn't flinch when she noticed a subtle imbalance in the hydraulic trim logs. Instead, she walked to the hangar with her helmet under one arm, eyes scanning the sky, not for fear, but for signs. That morning, the clouds sat low, thickening quietly. Too early, she thought. Too heavy. But no one paused. No one canceled. Why? Would they? Storms were predictions, and Thompson had weather certification, scribbled all over his jacket like a trophy. Elise climbed in. The jet rolled down the runway, humming smooth. She closed her eyes once, not to sleep, not to dream, but to listen. The air was wrong, thin, high-strung. As they rose, the clouds swallowed them whole. At 3,000 feet, turbulence began to gnaw. Not sharp, not sudden, just insistent. Like fingers. Drumming on glass, Thompson muttered, adjusted the trim, and muttered again. Elise glanced at the altimeter. Pressure dropping too fast. She keyed the comm. Control. Bravo 9 experiencing increased oscillation. Requesting weather reconfirmation. Static, then finally. Bravo 9, radar shows rapid convergence from the north. Divert south immediately. Elise opened her mouth, but Thompson waved her off. We're fine. Just keep eyes on instrument redundancy. The first drop felt like falling off a cliff. Unannounced. Violent. The plane tilted 22 degrees before he could counter. Then lightning, close, too close, flashed across the left wing, turning the sky into a camera flash. Thompson cursed. The instruments blinked. Warning tones screamed, then nothing. The jet stabilized just enough to reveal the worst truth of all. Thompson was slumped forward, unconscious. No shouts. No cinematic gasp. Just a slow collapse, head against the panel, breath ragged, limp. Elise stared, and in that half-second, longer than memory, shorter than thought, she felt the world stop. Then the instinct surged. She slid her hand over the high throttle, her other to the yoke, fingers wrapping around the metal like they were born to do it. She pushed his dead weight back, strapped him tighter so he wouldn't fall forward again. Her breath slowed, just like her father taught her in the hangar. Machines don't panic, people do. The comms crackled back to life. Bravo 9, respond. Bravo 9, do you copy? Elise keyed the mic. This is Elise Laurent. Cadet Thompson is incapacitated. I am assuming control of the aircraft. Silence, then. You're what? Do not engage flight controls, await intercept. No time, she said, voice low. Weather's closing in. I'm losing stability on the right engine. She didn't. Wait for permission. The storm howled around her. Wind shear knocked the fuselage like fists on a door. But Elise wasn't a guest here. She belonged. She felt the right side drag, compressor stall, maybe partial flameout. She dialed it down, redistributed throttle to balance. Nose pitched forward. She pulled just enough to correct without risking a stall. She remembered the sound this engine made when it cried. She remembered the weight of metal under tension. The subtle groan just before failure. Every vibration spoke to her. And for the first time, someone was listening back. The air traffic controller came back, frantic. Laurent, say your experience level. Are you rated for descent? No, she said. But I know this machine. And then she whispered, more. To the aircraft than the radio. Stay with me, girl. She didn't aim to land, that wasn't the goal. She aimed to survive. To keep this machine in the air long enough to find Earth again. To read wind like scripture. To see through cloud and chaos and carry not just herself, but 28 souls behind her, into tomorrow. In the eye of the storm, surrounded by lightning and silence and disbelief, Elise held a plane together by memory, by instinct, by grace. And, somewhere in the control tower, someone watching a blinking dot on the radar finally said the thing no one had dared. She's flying it. Not crashing, not stalling, not pretending, flying. Not because she was allowed, not because she had earned their respect, but because when the sky turned cruel and the world blinked, Elise Laurent reached out with hands no one trusted, and she flew. Not for pride, not for revenge, but because the storm had come, and she was the only one left who could answer. They say storms don't speak, but Elise would have argued otherwise. Because as she gripped the yoke, eyes flitting between the cloud-bleached windshield and the trembling needles on her panel, she heard everything. The roar of wind against the fuselage like a scream with no words. The irregular thump of turbulence testing the frame's resolve. And beneath it all, deep, low, almost imperceptible, the voice of the aircraft itself, groaning, crying, not yet giving up. The right engine was losing combustion. She could feel it before the warning light flashed. The rhythm changed, less thrust, more resistance, like the right side of the aircraft was dragging its feet. "Come on," she murmured, adjusting the throttle, trimming with fine, precise movements. "Talk to me." She didn't yell, didn't pray. She listened. Below her, the world was a watercolor blur. Patches of earth and sky indistinguishable, horizon lost in the storm's bruise-colored belly. Inside the headset, chaos crackled. Controllers spoke over one another, confusion flooding every channel. "Bravo 9, confirm incapacitation of primary. Do not descend below cloud deck until vectors are clear. Who is flying that plane?" But Elise shut out the noise. This wasn't about noise anymore. It was about feel. She remembered nights back in the hangar when she'd tuned piston engines by the note they hummed. She remembered identifying overheating coils by how long they took to cool against the palm. She remembered the hum of planes that trusted her, and how that trust felt when metal stopped screaming and started to breathe. Now this machine didn't need a pilot. It needed her. She eased the throttle again, too much and she'd stall, too little and she'd spiral. Just enough, and she could coax the engine back into alignment with the surviving thrust vector. Then she spoke. Not to the tower, not to the crew, to the plane. "Come on, girl, we've danced before." The nose dipped again, sharp, sudden. A gust ripped through, pushing the tail sideways. The plane yawed hard left. Elise braced her feet, corrected with a clean rudder tap, as smooth as breath. Her hands moved faster now, not rushed but aware. 100 tiny adjustments, most of them felt more than seen. Every part of her remembered. The slight stickiness in the throttle response, from that worn housing under the left panel. The right. Trim panel vibrating too loud. A minor bracket crack she'd reported twice, but no one fixed. Even the way the canopy whistled at high speeds. The sealant fault near the starboard hinge. She had fixed this plane. She knew this plane, and now she was flying it. Not like a cadet, not like a candidate seeking approval, but like someone who'd already held every piece of its soul in her hands. Control chimed in again. "Bravo 9, do you require autopilot assist for descent?" She didn't even answer, because it wasn't about systems anymore. Autopilot didn't know the engine tone was slightly off-tempo. Autopilot didn't know the vibration pattern meant a bearing might shear if she banked too hard left. Autopilot didn't feel Elise banked anyway, slight right, then level. The cloud layer thickened, darker now, as if the sky itself was watching. A voice, young, panicked, came from the back cabin. "Are we going to die?" Elise didn't turn, didn't respond. Instead, she whispered, not loud, not for reassurance, but as a promise. No, they wouldn't die, because she was here. Because she knew this storm wasn't a wall, it was a question. And her answer was in every quiet night spent memorizing the behavior of machines when they were in pain. Every missed party, every scoffed rejection, every laugh that said, "You're not the right kind." This was her language. And at 12,000 feet, bleeding altitude, mid-storm, surrounded by disbelief, Elise spoke fluently. The air smoothed slightly as they pierced the lower edge of the storm. Just enough clarity to catch her first glimpse of Earth, blurry and wet but real. Ahead, a stretch of gray. Concrete, a landing strip. Somewhere in the tower, voices stilled. Because she was still in the air. Because she hadn't lost them. Because she had become, in the silence between chaos and control, not the exception, but the answer. The storm didn't let go easily, even as the plane dipped below the cloud line, breaking through the bruised underbelly into a haze of gray light. The winds clawed at the wings, yanking like a child mid-tantrum. Visibility was low, just enough to see the runway stretching ahead like a lifeline, wet and shimmering with rain, flanked by frantic red lights and emergency crews bracing beneath ponchos. Elise didn't blink. She kept her breath even, hands relaxed around the yoke, reading the air the way a violinist reads silence before the first note. Behind her, 28 passengers sat in stunned quiet. The instructor slumped unconscious in the co-pilot's seat, head bandaged from a mid-flight jolt. And somewhere in the back, a child began to cry softly, not out of fear but from the weight of waiting. Elise whispered again to the plane. Just a little longer. Her descent was steep but controlled. She didn't aim for beauty. She didn't smooth out every bump. This wasn't a test. This was survival. She managed the flaps slowly. Each notch counted. The left side actuator had been sticky last week, and it still resisted, stuttering like a heart under strain. But she compensated. Adjusted throttle. Trimmed again. Let the nose align itself like a body remembering where it once belonged. She didn't rush it. No sudden glory, no cinematic sweep. Just the slow, careful negotiation of fear into function. At 200 feet, the winds kicked again, a side shear slamming from the left, pushing them off vector. A gasp from the back. The wing dipped. Elise didn't flinch. She countered instinctively. Right rudder, lean back on the yoke, ease throttle right, feel the nose return. She didn't need an audience. She just needed ground. The wheels hit the runway harder than ideal, but square. A shudder shook the frame. Rain burst upwards in silver sheets. Reverse thrusters engaged. The aircraft hissed, slowed, breathed, and then stopped. It was over. For a full second, no one moved. Then a scream erupted, not from fear, but from release. Cheers. Applause, crying, disbelief. She did it. We're on the ground. Why, she saved us. Elise didn't react. She sat there, eyes still forward, breath slowing. Her hands were still on the yoke. They didn't tremble. Outside the cockpit, emergency lights flashed like strobe pulses. Rain splashed against the glass in quick, stuttering waves. The radio clicked. Bravo. 9, you are clear. We have medical and fire teams en route. Say again. Who was at the controls? Elise finally pressed the comm. This is Elise Laurent, aircraft mechanic, acting pilot in command. A pause. The longest pause she had ever heard in a room full of radios. Then quietly, copy that. She rose from her seat slowly, her knees a little stiff, but steady. As the hatch opened, the wind greeted her first. Not with violence, but with cool approval. Down the stairs, the passengers spilled out, wet faces, tear-streaked, half-stunned by gravity. A man grabbed her hand, wouldn't let go. You were in control? She nodded. He looked at her like seeing someone not made of skin and bone, but of steel and cloud. Then came the others. Arms, hugs, shouts. Someone filmed. Someone screamed her name to the sky. But Elise didn't raise her hands in victory. She wasn't celebrating. She was present. She was alive. And the thing that once seemed the furthest from her, flying, was no longer something she had to ask for. It was something she had already done, not imagined, not attempted but achieved, not for glory, not for a badge, not even for revenge. She had done it because the plane needed a voice, and she was the only one left who could hear. Three days passed before the academy called her in, not to discipline her, not to question her choices, to apologize. They invited her into the same steel-gray room where they once laughed at her resume, the same table where her hands had once trembled holding the paper they ridiculed. Now those same hands rested still. No grease this time, no oil, no proof of labor, just calm. Commander Holt wasn't present. Whether from shame or sudden reassignment, Elise never asked. Captain Vale stood stiffly, arms crossed, eyes not quite meeting hers. The dean, an older man with pilot wings silvered from decades of dust, offered a seat, then spoke slowly as if tasting every word. You saved 28 lives, Miss Laurent, he said. You demonstrated grace, intuition, and technical mastery under pressure. More than that, he hesitated. You flew when no one else could. He cleared his throat. We misjudged you. There it was. The closest thing to truth an institution could offer. Then came the offer of full scholarship, an instructor position, access to the advanced flight program, a public commendation. Elise listened. She nodded once. Not yes, not no, just understanding. She left without accepting anything because in truth she no longer needed it. By the end of the week, media had caught wind. Clips from the flight log leaked. Audio files of her voice cutting through static, steady, instructive. She became a symbol overnight. The mechanic who flew. Rejected pilot turns hero. Engineer of the skies. But Elise didn't do interviews. She didn't show up for magazine shoots or stand under spotlights. She didn't smile beside aircraft she didn't trust. Instead, she went home, to the hangar, to her father's old bench, still stained with 30 years of machines and memory. She cleaned it, repaired the stripped lighting, re-oiled the wrench set. Then she bought a plane. Not new, not shiny. A second-hand T-tailed twin engine with character and a few quirks, just enough for her to fix. She named it Gale. Every morning before the sun climbed, she wheeled her plane out of the hangar, checked her tools, ran the diagnostics by ear, and then she flew. Not on commercial routes, not on schedules or commissions. She flew people who'd never seen the sky from the inside. A retired teacher who'd lost her husband too soon. A young boy terrified of heights, holding his sister's hand. A woman whose father had flown fighters and left behind an empty seat in her heart. Elise flew them, not to show off, not to prove anything, just to share what the world had tried to keep from her. The joy of silence above the clouds, the peace of being small beneath the stars, the hush in your chest when the earth falls away and your breath becomes part of the wind. One afternoon, as she walked across the runway in her now well-worn flight suit, a cadet approached her, nervous, earnest. "Miss Laurent," she stammered. I read about you. I want to fly too, but my grades aren't, my record's messy. They said I don't have the profile." Elise looked at the girl. She saw her own past in the slope of her shoulders, in the softness that hadn't been hardened yet. She placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then stop showing them your profile," she said. "Show them your flight." And the girl cried. That evening, Elise climbed into Gale, ran her fingers over the yoke. The seat fit better now. The sky no longer felt like a visitor's space. She wasn't a passenger anymore. She didn't need their permission. She was born to do this. Not because she had the right name or the right uniform, but because when the storm rose and the world asked who would answer, Elise did. With hands that once only fixed wings, she became them. If this story moved you, even just a little, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet strength can change everything. And if you'd like more stories like this, filled with heart, hope, and second chances, consider subscribing. Your support means the world.